Moving on to posterior pituitary. So hormones secreted by the posterior pituitary, these are antidiuretic hormone, ADH, also known by the name of vasopressin, as well as oxytocin. So these are two structurally related hormones. Both of them cause desire to cuddle, groom, and bond with a mate. And antidiuretic hormone, okay, also known as vasopressin. Vasos refer to blood vessel. Pressin is pressure. So the name is referring to the fact that it helps with the regulation of blood pressure. So the way that it works is, and more detail to come in the urinary system lecture, but the way that antidiuretic hormones exert their effect is by increasing the water reabsorption in your kidneys. So when your kidneys help you retain more water, okay, that's going to help raise your blood pressure and dilute your blood, so your blood osmolarity will decrease. Okay, oxytocin, okay, is a structurally related molecule. Okay, but its main effect are twofold. One is to signal uterine wall contraction during childbirth to help expel the newborn. And secondarily, it also plays an important role in the milk letdown reflex. Okay, and that means the ejection of milk in response to the infant suckling on the mother's nipple. Now we're going to take a look at the hypothalamic control of hormone release from the posterior pituitary. Okay, so oxytocin and ADH are actually made by these hypothalamic neurons in hypothalamus. And once they are made, they are transported down the length of these axons until they reach the posterior pituitary. Okay, and they are then stored inside these axon terminals until these neurons are triggered to fire, at which point they are then released into the blood. Okay, so in a sense, posterior pituitary is not considered a true endocrine gland, unlike the anterior pituitary, because recall the anterior pituitary actually makes its own hormones, whereas the posterior pituitary does not make its own hormones. Rather, the hormones that are released by posterior pituitary actually were made up here in the hypothalamus. So take a moment to understand that concept. Okay, so in other words, the posterior pituitary only stores and releases hormones produced up in the hypothalamus. Oh, why is this blurry? So here's that image again, just recapping the concept of difference between how hypothalamus triggers anterior pituitary to secrete hormones, and how it triggers hormone release from the posterior pituitary. Okay. Here's another question for you. Which of the following is unlike the others? Take a moment to pause this video and think about this. Ready for the answer? The answer is oxytocin. Okay, why is that? Think about where it's secreted. Anterior pituitary, anterior pituitary, anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary. Moving on to thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is located in your anterior neck. Okay. It produces two important hormones. One is the thyroid hormone, which regulates your basal metabolic rate, It also secretes another hormone called calcitonin. And you can probably imagine this prefix tells you that it helps with the regulation of calcium. Okay. And this is an image or histological image showing the follicular cells that secrete thyroid hormone and the parafollicular cells right next to the thyroid follicles that secrete calcitonin. I only included this image to remind students that calcitonin is secreted by thyroid gland, because for some reason, a lot of times students will mix this with the parathyroid hormone and think that this is secreted by parathyroid. No, calcitonin is actually secreted in the thyroid. Parathyroid gland, the only important hormone secreted by parathyroid gland is the parathyroid hormone, PTH. Okay, so PTH is a hormone that whose release is triggered by low blood calcium, but whose effect is to increase the blood calcium. So if you look at the thyroid from a posterior view, you'll find the parathyroid glands. You have 4 of those. Adrenal gland. Adrenal gland, also known by the name of suprarenal gland. Supra is above, renal is a kidney, so suprarenal is above kidney. Okay, so roughly divided into 2 sections, the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. And they are very different tissues. Adrenal cortex is this outer layer, and adrenal medulla are actually derived from neural tissue. So it's a cluster of neurons, and it's actually part of the autonomic nervous system, specifically the sympathetic nervous system. So all adrenal hormones, whether secreted by adrenal cortex or adrenal medulla, they all have some role in helping our body cope with danger, terror, and stress. Adrenal cortex, if we look at just the adrenal cortex, it can be roughly divided into 3 subsections: the zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. And the primary hormones secreted by each are the aldosterone secreted by zona glomerulosa, cortisol secreted by zona fasciculata, and DHEA, which is an androgen secreted by zona reticularis. And so the way to remember this is salt, sugar, 6. The deeper you go, the sweeter it gets. So salt is referring to the fact that aldosterone acts to help with retention of water and salt. Okay. And so cortisol is a stress hormone that raises your blood glucose when you're stressed. Okay, so salt, sugar, 6, because this is a sex hormone. Okay. And deeper you go, the sweeter it gets, because this is the deepest of the 3. Okay. Pineal gland. Okay, pineal gland is located on the posterior aspect of this hypothalamus, and it's the only important hormone that it secretes that you have to be aware of is melatonin, which regulates circadian rhythm. Moving on to the pancreas. The pancreas is a special organ because it's got a mix of both exocrine as well as endocrine cells. The exocrine component secretes digestive enzymes, and those are released through ducts into the small intestine to help with digestion. Its endocrine component, namely the pancreatic islets or the islets of Langerhans, okay, those contain cells that secrete hormones that are released into blood. Okay, so the pancreatic islets are or consist of these varieties of cells, one of which is alpha cells, which secrete glucagon. And these hormones acts to raise blood glucose. Okay, there are also the beta cells, which secretes insulin. Insulin is a hormone that causes a drop in blood sugar. Okay, or it signals our body cells to take up the glucose circulating in blood, and so it acts to lower our blood sugar. Thymus. So thymus is actually an important immune organ. You may recall from anatomy that this is the location of T cell maturation. So after T cells, B cells are made inside bone marrow, T cells actually migrate to thymus for its maturation process. The gonads, which are testes in men and ovaries in women. And so they are the main sources of sex hormones. Okay. In men, testosterone helps with the promotion of spermatogenesis, or formation of sperm. It also plays an important role in the development and maintenance of secondary sexual characteristics. In females, the corresponding female hormones are estrogen and progesterone. So estrogen helps with maintaining the secondary sex characteristics in females. Progesterone has an important role in preparing our uterine lining for pregnancy.